All right, so my name is Tim Gagnon, and I will be your moderator today for the GDPR session. I'm a principal consultant at SEI based out of our DC office, and my background is actually a little different than most folks in the compliance and ethics space. I actually come from the digital space. So a few years back when GDPR was announced, there was really a lack of resources in this area, lack of specialty. So I was one of those few volunteers who decided to really refocus my career to data privacy. Been doing so ever since with different laws such as GDPR, which we're going to talk about specifically today, as well as some of the new laws in the US like the California data privacy law. So I'm definitely very excited today with this panel that we have, very impressive panel. So would like to take a minute, and if you could each introduce yourselves, that'd be great.
Sure. Hi everyone, I'm Karen Benson, and I'm the Assistant Chief Compliance Officer for Royal Caribbean. Hopefully we've got some cruise fans in the audience. And I inherited GDPR about a year ago, so privacy is also a new area for me. Within our organization, we've got 3 wholly owned brands, so Royal Caribbean International, Celebrity Cruises, and Azamara Club Cruises. In addition, we've got 3 joint venture brands, one in Germany called TUI Cruises, one in Spain called Pullmantur Cruises, and a new acquisition that just took place late last year called Silversea Cruises, which is based in Monaco. And we've got 77,000 employees around the world, 120 nationalities. We visit 7 continents, 1,000 destinations, and so privacy is a big area for our company.
So good morning, everyone. My name is Cédric Dubas. I'm the Chief Compliance and Ethics Officer at Volvo Cars. Before that, I was the head of Compliance and Ethics in a software company in France. And I've been in the compliance and ethics field for more than 15 years, but dealing with data protection for 10 years now. We always say that nowadays cars are software on wheels or computers on wheels, so you can imagine that data protection is a big thing for us.
Great, and my name is Chris Lang. I'm Vice President of Compliance and Ethics and the Global Privacy Officer for UPS. All familiar with UPS, the brown vehicles delivering small packages, but we also have logistics and distribution facilities where we're providing pick, pack, and ship, reverse logistics for clients in the tech space and healthcare space. We do freight brokering, and we operate in 200 countries around the world, either through our directly owned companies or through service contractors that we use.
Perfect. So would definitely like to get a feel for the audience as well too. So who's been involved in any GDPR readiness or implementations over the last few years? Okay, so most of the group here, and I'm sure everyone's looking forward to the new privacy laws coming out as well too. So we could definitely talk about this topic for days. Unfortunately, we only have 55 minutes, so we're gonna do our best to hit on some key points. And in discussing this topic with the group, we'd really like to do 3 things today. First of all, talk to you about the different journeys that each of the organizations has taken with GDPR to get ready for May 25th of 2018 when the law went into enforcement. Then we want to kind of go into the details a little bit and talk about some of the challenges that each of these organizations has faced, as well as some lessons learned and creative solutions on how we actually tackled those challenges. And then lastly, we want to look beyond GDPR to more global data privacy with the changing landscape to really understand how are we shifting our focus from GDPR to global privacy as a whole. So with that, we'll start off with Karen. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the journey since the law was announced back in 2016, and then really what's happened since the law has been in effect May 25th of last year, now that we're almost 1 year into it.
So it was definitely, it is definitely a marathon and not a sprint. We started organizing ourselves about 15, 16 months before the law came into place. Because GDPR really touched every aspect of our operation, we really broke out into or created work streams in the organization. And found executive sponsors to really lead each of those work streams, in the organization. And really what we found, through the journey or through that process, it was a very iterative and collaborative approach. And so it was more than just, the lawyers, putting down the rules and the requirements, but we found that we really needed to collaborate really closely with our IT folks, our digital folks, our business folks, and marketing. And one of the things that we really learned through the project is we used a lot of project managers to help us with the work streams and the follow through that needed to happen when we were pushing out all of these changes. Because as part of the journey, there was a lot of change management. So with just trying to identify all of the processing activities that were taking place in the organization, there was a lot of education and awareness going on as well. And so that prompted more questions and more inquiries, which was what we wanted, because again, we wanted everyone to think about privacy at the forefront. So it took us, the journey really took us about 18 months to really get there and put a baseline in place and a foundation for, our data subject requests, because we are a business to consumer organization industry. So, we had to prepare ourselves for what was going to come in terms of requests. We had to prepare our websites and all our privacy notices, make sure that our consents were in place. We did a lot of education as well outside the organization with our customers to make sure that they understood how we were processing their data. We did a lot of work with our third parties in terms of making sure that we did the assessments correctly. We understood what technical measures they had in place. A lot of contract work and remediation to get our contracts in order. So really just a laundry list of things, but I think what made the whole thing work was we created mini work streams. And so each stream had the executive sponsor, and so that we would regularly meet with our executive sponsors to make sure that the work within that work stream was getting done.
Great. Cedric?
I think we've been through the same kind of actions.
Yeah.
No, basically, the program at Volvo Cars started when the data protection officer joined the beginning of 2016. I was not at Volvo Cars at that time because I joined early 2017. What I can witness is that it takes a lot of time to embark all the stakeholders. We were discussing this morning, and I would say that you need at least a year to be able to start your project. I don't know if you have experienced the same kind of challenge. But this being said, I fully agree with you. The project managers are key. They are there to whip the organization. Otherwise, nothing happens. Besides that, in terms of organization, what I can share with you is that we have this COSO approach, meaning that operations will remain responsible for their risk. They own the risks. So it means that we have had all operations identify a data protection coordinator, dedicating, depending on the function or depending on the location, dedicating between 35 and up to 70% of their time to data protection compliance for the first 6 months of the project. And we were talking about the project manager. Without this function, that cannot work, because we need to have status meetings every week. You've been there, I guess. And we had 4 external project managers for this project. But all the data protection coordinators were appointed by the VPs of the functions or the MDs in the regions. It means that you definitely need to have the sponsorship of high-level positions.
Great. Thanks, Cedric. And Chris?
Yeah, and our experience at UPS is very similar as well. When we've had a privacy office at UPS since I think 2010, and before that we had privacy officers in Europe. Given that we've been operating in certain jurisdictions there for a while, but as the GDPR looked like it was going to be adopted in 2016, we brought it to our governance committees at the corporate office and in the region. And it does take some time to socialize the concepts, the significant change of what is necessary to get the organization ready. I think having those governance structures is really helpful because it allowed us to get in front of the leadership of the company. And just like Cedric and Karen were saying, executive sponsorship is critical. So using our governance committees, we were able to get the support of key C-level executives, which enabled us to bring the project. In our case, it was important to bring this project under the governance of the IT organization. And so through our Information Security and Privacy Governance Council, we then became a formalized project within IT, reporting to the CIO on progress and then providing updates to that cross-functional governance council. And on an annual basis, we report to the risk committee of our board of directors. So we did have the visibility there of that oversight. By working with IT closely, we were able to get the types of project managers that you guys were describing to run an overall program, which included many different projects. And these projects at first started with the inventory, make sure we had an inventory of all the systems and applications that process personal data. We also had certain portfolios within IT, and then in the business functions, appointing data protection coordinators. We called them GDPR leads. So they were the point people for their particular function or their particular IT portfolio. And they were responsible for initially making sure the inventory was completed. They didn't necessarily have to do it themselves, but they were responsible to make sure that throughout their area of responsibility, these forms were getting completed and added into our inventory system. And then we've been working continuously with this group to engage them in the various other compliance activities that are needed to execute on requests that come in from individuals and other types of project-related compliance activities for GDPR. But yeah, definitely executive level support and a cross-functional approach is necessary because it really, the definition of personal data is so broad, it's likely to touch all corners of an organization.
Yeah, that's so important, really breaking down those barriers between compliance and ethics, IT, your different business stakeholders to really mobilize an organization around an initiative like this. And I'm interested to hear a little bit more about getting the word out to all of your employees, because within all of your businesses, at one point or another, all of your employees, or at least most of your employees, are in contact with personal information, whether that's internal information or a consumer's information. So I'd like to hear, of course we mentioned the data protection coordinators, these leads, other creative ways to get the word out to your employees to really rally behind this initiative and march to the same beat. So Karen, start off with you again.
So we thought about how we were going to deploy this, because we have a lot of different offices around the world, and then obviously our ships are moving around 7 continents. So what we did is we created a couple workshops, and we had a big kickoff in a couple of different locations, bringing actually hundreds of people out for a 2-day summit to talk about what was going to happen, how we were assembling these work streams, bringing our project managers there, bringing our external counsel there, and really socializing the plan that everybody was going to be involved in. And so I think the initial engagement was really important, and I think everybody felt that they had a stake in this, which was really important to make sure that we continued with the momentum. So we did these initial kickoff workshops, but for the larger employee base, in terms of making sure everybody was getting ready, because these workshops, or these groups of people, were going to be going into the business, going into the operations, and talking to people to get the information that they needed. We started doing a slow drip campaign at the same time. So we try to make it really fun in our organization, because it's Royal Caribbean and we're hospitality, and we've got a lot of different exciting initiatives in our organization to kind of partner with marketing and entertainment. So we did a countdown campaign, and we did true or false campaigns throughout the organization. So we would do little snippets. GDPR is an IT thing only. true or false. And then we'd have people submit in what they thought true or false. And then the next day we'd give out the answer. And then we'd send broadcasts, or we'd do infographics. And so we had a slow drip going throughout for the last 18 months, so that when the work stream was coming to meet with the business or the IT group or whoever the group was, they'd know exactly what GDPR was, what was expected to them. So that's how we built in communication.
Yeah, very good. And Cedric?
So first, we focused on our data protection coordinators. They all received 1 week training, face-to-face training, through the data protection officer, and also our data protection expert, legal expert in my team. So that was the key focus, because the target was for them, well, for us to train the trainer, and for them to train locally all their members. That was the first step. Second step was an e-learning. So e-learning, good, bad, but at least it can create awareness. So the e-learning was launched in September, mandatory for all employees. But afterwards, it was not, the decision was taken to also communicate a lot via the intranet with very short messages. Because very often employees are fed up with e-learning, so it had to be short. We could not cover everything, and basically we did it in 2 steps. And the last thing we did, just like you did, a countdown. Well, May 25th, it was really fast, from September 2017 until May 25th, 2018. And 2 months before, we launched the countdown, but with some kind of game. And in the end, those who had answered, who had a good answer to the most questions, were awarded and named as our champions.
Great. Chris?
Yeah, we did similar activities. One thing that we have been doing for the last few years is something called the Privacy Awareness Week, which is a week that we activate around the world with the various privacy coordinators, where we're sponsoring lunch and learns. We have giveaways, little things to remind people about privacy activities. One year we gave away these Post-it notes that said on them, please tell me this isn't your password. We didn't come up with that. I think I saw that from another company, but it's actually something that's come up in audit findings, where people do write their passwords and stick them right on the computer. So things like that, memorable but relatively inexpensive items to hand out to folks. I mentioned the lunch and learns. What has been pretty effective too is to do some type of a giveaway, whether it's an iPad or a watch or something like this. That tends to get a lot of comments on articles that we post to try to raise awareness. We also developed a presentation, almost like a roadshow presentation, on the basics of GDPR, what it means, and what our project was. And myself and the lead from IT went around to every committee that would have us. And at UPS, we have these groups called Business Risk and Compliance Committees that are in the business at all levels of the business. So they were really good places for us to go and provide just a presentation to the leadership teams on what this was, why it was important to UPS, and what we were doing about it. And then we had the general training as well that we rolled out to all folks through the LMS system, and using our internal portal with articles and so forth to try to raise awareness that way. And then lastly, we every year sponsor an executive conference where the C-level and then all of the executives get together, and as part of that there was a breakout session where myself and the Chief Information Security Officer talked about privacy and information security in breakout sessions kind of like this, with the top leadership, so that if they hadn't already heard it from a BRCC or some other governance group, they were hearing it again. And so it's just a way to kind of reinforce that message and make sure that everybody had awareness of it.
Yeah, I was going to say too that the message is really important. So, from my perspective, they always, when they see me, they know it's compliance and it's legal requirements and regulatory requirements. So, we had a little bit of a different spin on our message this time around. It was more about competitive advantage, right? So, if you cleaned your data up, you have more opportunity now to do some really good things with that data. And so really making sure that message was more about partnering with them and helping get the house in order was a really important theme that we tried to push throughout the transformation.
Yeah, there's definitely a competitive advantage that you see to making sure, both internally within improving your operations, but also externally letting your customers know that we really care about your data. We are protecting it from the moment that you give it to us until we need to remove that data from our systems. Absolutely. And a lot of really cool ideas here, really going along with the theme of yesterday in terms of getting rid of corporate speak and making these, really hard concepts a little more tangible for employees. So that's great to hear. And just to switch gears here a little bit, and Chris, I'll keep it with you. Have you start off on this one. So what was your greatest challenge with GDPR, and how did you overcome that challenge?
I think that the definition of personal data is so broad. That was probably the biggest education for the UPSers. We have always been protecting customer data and personal information, but to be able to educate the globe, if you will, on how broad the definition is for the Europeans, that was one of our key, I think, first challenges, to make sure that everybody understood that even what we might view in the United States as relatively innocuous information, not terribly sensitive. It's not a social security number or a credit card number or healthcare data, but it's your name and other information that could be linked to you. Maybe not even your name. Maybe it's some identifier within a system that, if combined with another system, could be identified with you, and therefore it's personal data. And therefore it's subject to all of the limitations and the obligations in the GDPR. So that was the first real hurdle. We felt like if we were able to get everybody on board with what this law was covering, and also to provide some of the background as to why the Europeans viewed it in such a way, and they have a different perspective on it than the U.S. regulatory approach. That was really important, to explain the why, get people to understand why this was important and why it was important to the regulators there. And then that helped to initiate the project when we went out and did the inventory, because the inventory is really broad. When you have a very broad definition of personal data, the number of applications and systems and processes that are going to be handling and using personal data is very broad. But it was extremely helpful for us because we were able to have a very comprehensive, and we went with a global inventory, so that we didn't limit it to just European personal data. We pulled into the inventory personal data regardless in the world where it was collected. And then it also helped, I think, the various groups to be thinking about other solutions like data minimization and de-identifying data and anonymization and so forth. Because once you really understand how broad this is, then you kind of naturally go to those privacy by design and privacy by default areas out of just problem solving. So that was most helpful for us to start from that perspective.
That's great. Cedric, your biggest challenge?
We've had several challenges. I would say that the first challenge was the rollout of the program in APAC and Americas, because in the EU we had the directive in place for several years, since 1995. So Data protection has always been in the mind of the Europeans, so it was much easier. As you were saying, we had to explain what personal data meant for the Europeans, and it actually took much more time to embark our DPCs in APAC and in Americas. So that was the first challenge. Second challenge, I agree with you, privacy by design. We have embedded a data protection gate in most of our processes. So I would say that's rather easy. But many projects don't necessarily go through a set process. And this requires a tremendous amount of awareness throughout the organization. And to be fully transparent, I would say that we're not there yet. Privacy by design needs further awareness. Second challenge. My third challenge is around data retention. How long do you keep the data? And depending on the country, you may have to keep the data for a specific processing activity for 10 years, and in another country, it could be 50 years. So how do you cope with that? When do you anonymize your data? What do you do with the data? And my fourth nightmare was around data processing agreements. When you have hundreds of processors, you need to discuss with all these processors. You need to negotiate, and it takes a lot of time. So I would say that intra-group data processing agreements are rather easy to deal with, but with your suppliers, it's another story.
I echo my panelists. Actually, this morning I was asking them, I showed them my scars and asked to see their scars. So I think we had the same similar challenges. And within the cruise industry, we have multiple sub-industries within one, right? So we have a big supply chain. We actually have a whole medical department, a whole big travel distribution with travel agents and charters. So we are collecting data in all different ways. And so I think, the same challenges as my panelists here of sitting down and explaining, what personal data meant. And also because we do business in almost every country, the perspectives were really different. And so what do you mean if I collect dietary information that's going to tell me religion? I can't keep that? That's sensitive? And so those types of questions were happening, which were good because it was part of the awareness and getting people, again, sensitized to, the different perspectives that were happening around the world. And I echo Cedric's comment about record retention and would even push it further, which is the technology. And so for our organization, we have a lot of legacy systems. And so, going back and looking at those legacy systems and trying to find data to deal with data subject requests, whether it was a deletion or an access to information, how that information was processed and making sure if you were going to anonymize something or delete it, did it, was it upstream, was it downstream, would it break the system, would it slow the system down? So from my perspective, one of the challenging things was learning to partner with IT and the digital folks and learning to speak IT and figure out how to manage, complying with someone's request without stopping the operation or breaking a system per se. And, funny story, I remember sitting with two architects and we were trying to figure out how we were going to anonymize data. And, I said, well, can't you just remove this field from the system? And you could see, the IT person saying, no, you can't do that. You'll break the system. And I said, okay, well, what if we trick the system and just put in a code that says, GDPR or some other code you can put in there? And then all of a sudden you'd start to see the gears kind of change, and they'd start looking at each other, and they start arguing, these two architects, and I'm looking over at another person, says, is this normal? She says, yeah, this is their process. So, which was good, because they were thinking about it. And I said, well, you guys make sure that this works. I don't want you to say legal broke your system. But this is the partnership and the trust that had to be built with the organization to kind of get there, to figure out how you were going to process these requests. So technology, I think, was a challenge for us, and I think this is always going to be an iterative approach. None of us, I think, have a perfect privacy program. We're constantly learning, we're constantly evolving, and I think as the years come, I think you'll find these programs become much more mature over time.
Yeah, and on that sorry.
I was going to add one challenge that I still face today. We're calling our program Data Protection Compliance Program and not GDPR, but still many people in the organization keep calling the program GDPR program. But as you were saying, Tim, at the very beginning of this session, we have the Chinese cybersecurity law. We have the Japanese data privacy law. There are many other legislations that need to be taken into account. So we cannot just call a program GDPR program. It must be much wider.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just pause right here. I know we've talked about a lot of different topics. I want to give the audience an opportunity if there are any questions out there based on anything that we talked about. Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I'll question it. And Karen kind of was touching on it at the end. We've heard a lot about what you did to set up, to address it, go through the whole process, to document and all that. But we've read that there's been tens of thousands of claims already filed. So from a process standpoint, especially because you're so distributed across the world, the customer requests and complaints coming in, they can be coming in over, requesting to be forgotten and whatever. So what's the processes you've set up that once you've done the setup to administer and deal with the customer's claims being filed? Yes, it's literally there's been so many. What's that been like? How have you done that?
I'd like to take it.
Yeah, I'll start. Yeah,
Perfect.
so that's a great point, and that's one that it's really critical to make sure that you get it right and you have a good process, because it's important to be able to respond to your customers and other consumers that you may be collecting their personal information to provide the services. So first thing is to make it easy for folks to figure out how to make these requests. What we've done is we've implemented into our customer service process. So on our website, for individuals to be able to make a data privacy request, they just make a request as if they were making any other customer service request. And there's a drop down that's specific to data privacy. That will route them to the right folks within our customer service group, and then ultimately back to the privacy office to be handled. And that's whether it's a right to be forgotten request or some other type of privacy related complaint. There's also a lot of training that has to happen with the customer service groups to make sure that if something comes in that's not proper, they didn't select the right drop down, the customer service reps can understand that, okay, this is actually a privacy issue. It needs to go to the privacy office for handling. We had to do education efforts for all of the various offices that might be receiving letters to make sure that they understood that these needed to be routed to the privacy office for handling. Anything that might involve an incident had to be immediately escalated so that we could put it through our incident response process and make sure that was handled. And we went so far as even doing what we call PCMs, or pre-work communications, to all of our drivers in the European Union. We call them service providers, to make sure that they were aware that this law was out there, that our customers and the people that we serve have the right to certain information, and if you're asked about this is what you should tell the individuals, and how to direct them to get the proper support that they need. So that's all just to make sure that we can handle the ones that come in and we know what it is that the customer is asking for, and then it gets routed to the privacy office. And then a big work stream that we had in the project was to make sure that we had the appropriate high trust system, if you will, to log those requests when they came in, have a workflow management system so that they would be routed to the various groups, and had preset escalation procedures to make sure that, you know, if we had a right to be forgotten and a particular application owner wasn't, you know, reporting back that the deletion had happened, there'd be an escalation so that we wouldn't run past the 30-day window to get that completed.
Follow up to that.
Yeah.
So if you applied for a job and somebody who applied doesn't get the job, and they call HR and they say, I want to be forgotten, I want you to forget my application, does HR then contact the privacy office and say that, or does HR just take care of it? What's that loop like?
Yeah, ideally it would be that it would go through the privacy office and logged into our what we call, it's a internally developed system that where we log all of these requests. I know there are commercially available systems that help support this as well, but what we wanted is to make sure that everything was in that system of record, so that we could, you know, have confidence that it was handled properly within the right period of time, and that you know, we'd responded back to the individual either with the information that they'd requested or with the deletion or the opt-out or what have you. Yeah, so it was important to us to make sure that we had that in a system. We worked with our audit team on developing that system, make sure it had the type of controls in it that would demonstrate a trustworthy system to external auditors or regulators.
What was the rate of requests you all were receiving compared to what you expected?
It's
Well-
higher than I expected.
Well, as far as we're concerned, it's lower.
I want to go to your company.
Yeah. Ours is about a little bit higher than it had been previously. We'd been getting some of these requests even before GDPR went into effect, but I'd say a little bit higher, but not very much higher.
I think we probably all had a spike, you know, on May 25th, because there were people, you know, ready to exercise that right. You know, and to echo what Chris was saying, I think when we first started out, we were doing it manually. So I would definitely tell you, as lessons learned, if you are getting, you know, a fair number of these types of requests, doing it manually just doesn't work. We really looked at it and sort of treated it similar to our hotline case management system and created a whole workflow behind it as well, with, you know, different reporting channels, because these things were coming in through different areas, you know, similar to that. But one of the things that we also learned very early on is, you know, we created an email inbox of privacy@rccl.com and put it on our privacy notice. And my gosh, we started getting all really weird requests through that inbox. And sometimes we would get, you know, an email that would just say, from, you know, Mary Jo at, you know, AT&T.com, delete me. Do you know how many Mary Joes we have in our system? So for us, validation was a really challenging area to figure out, how do we validate someone and make sure we don't, you know, give somebody, you know, else's information to someone else, or we delete somebody and all of a sudden they lost all their loyalty points, and it, you know, that's not really what they meant. So so we took it back really quickly when we learned, you know, sending an, you know, doing an inbox wasn't really the right way to do this. So we created a web form, and a very strategic web form with very, you know, strategic questions that we're asking, strategic questions that we can go and validate our guests or our employees. You know, one of the things, again, a learning point that we learned, you know, initially we wanted to get driver's licenses or a picture ID to verify. And, you know, the guests were like, no, I'm not going to give you more information, you know. But at the same time, you know, we wanted to be very careful what we were giving out. So it was an iterative approach, I think, for us, and we've kind of balanced and figured out, you know, what that was. And I think now it's running much smoother. And it does have a customer service feel to it. We find that sometimes a lot of the requests that we get are coupled with some type of service failure, perhaps, and so we do leverage the customer service team quite a bit to try to diffuse, the issue. What we did try to do is create some very standard comms so that when it comes through this workflow system, you get an acknowledgement. It says, we'll take 30 days to process your request. If your request is very complicated, we may need some extra time, particularly in the deletion or access category. So if you're, somebody who's, cruised with us for several years, you're going to have a lot more data than if you were a prospective, person who was just receiving our marketing newsletter. And then behind the scenes, that was just more the front facing. The behind the scenes was even more challenging for us. Again, working with IT and building the appropriate capabilities to solution the request or fulfill the request. And so you want to be really careful before you delete somebody in the system, because again, they may lose loyalty points, or maybe there's litigation going on. Maybe they're a delinquent, consumer. They haven't paid their bill. So you certainly don't want to get rid of the system. So we had to build a lot of internal checks to go through the different groups to make sure, again, that before we hit, delete or whatever the request was, that we could do it.
And who is dealing with the requests? Customer services or
it's my
your
team?
office? Okay.
Yeah, we wanted to keep control. I was initially we set out to put this in the customer service team. I felt like we were too decentralized and we didn't have a really good picture, because we have a lot of different call centers. So what we did is, with these web forms that we created, if somebody does call the contact center, then the person that's taking the call will either direct them, say, hey, you can go to the site and you can fill out your own form, or I can fill it out on your behalf. But at least this way it's all going in through the same channel. And this way we have one central view of the number and volume of requests coming in.
I'm interested in what the most challenging sort of concept was to explain to customers, and if you're getting recontacts, what are they typically?
Yeah, for us, it's because like the airlines, right? We have security cameras on board our ships, right, for safety reasons, or we might collect certain data for safety. If we have a medical issue on board, norovirus takes place, we've got to give some stuff to public health as to what's going on. So we'll get these kind of random, inquiries about, I was on board, the ship, and there was a camera pointing this way. What kind of information, did it collect on me? Or, I was on a tour and, I got hurt. What kind of information does the tour operator have? Well, obviously, if they helped you, when you were hurt, they're the ones that were filling out the report. So it's that kind of vein that you would see in the hospitality, I think, space. I don't know, you guys probably have different different types.
As far as we are concerned, it's the fact that the right to be forgotten is not total. When you're contacted by a customer who is asking to be erased, if the customer has a loan or whatsoever, we still need the data. And we have a hard time to have that understood by the customers.
Yeah, that's a good one, because it is not absolute. You might have some other legal reasons to keep certain of the data. I'd say one area, this is not an issue that comes up with individual customers, but this is in our B2B business. There's under the European privacy laws, companies are kind of put into two categories generally, where you're either a controller of data or you're a processor of data. Controllers have certain obligations and they have the right to use information in certain ways, whereas the processors are generally viewed as vendors, where data is provided to the vendor and then the vendor can only use the data per the instructions of the controller. And so we have a lot of discussions with our customers about processors and controllers, because they may view UPS as a vendor and therefore think of us as a processor, but in fact we are making all kinds of decisions about routing of packages. We handle claims related to damages of packages. We answer questions from customers about where their package is and so forth. We also do the brokerage of packages going through customs and so forth. So we are a controller, but many customers think of us as a processor. So that's one area that we had to spend a lot of time coming up with materials to explain why we were not a processor, because one of the articles in the GDPR requires all controllers to have certain provisions in their contracts with processors. So there were lots of vendor agreements and amendments to vendor agreements going back and forth over the last year or so. We've been sending it out to our vendors, getting them from a lot of our customers, and so that's one area that we've had to really do a lot of work with customers, is to get them to see where we're coming from and why we're controllers, and why we don't necessarily need to sign up to those particular provisions in the GDPR.
Yeah, and there's these companies that have popped up now, where you can go on the website and they'll say, hey, tell me all the companies that you do business with, and I can push out a request to them to have them delete you. And so be wary of those, because one, you want to make sure that they really did get authorization from the direct customer to have their information deleted. And they can be voluminous. I've seen one, for example, that's come through with 1,000 people all at once. And so I think what we're starting to see, kind of like in the ADA space, unfortunately, there's some bottom feeders starting to pop up in this space. And I'm kind of disappointed, to be honest, when I see some of the requests that come through, because they don't really look like legitimate requests, about really protecting someone's data. And so you start to see these groups coming up, sort of testing companies to see whether or not, are they really following the letter of the law rather than the spirit, so to speak. So it's a little bit of a balance, because obviously any request that's not handled appropriately can turn into a public relations nightmare. We were talking about applying global standards, and we took a similar approach. So if you get a request from a U.S. citizen, are you going to tell them, no, I can't delete you because you're not European? No, we're going to process that request. So those are the kinds of things I think that we're still trying to balance and grapple with.
Yeah, so we only have a couple minutes left here, so I'd like to shift our gears to looking beyond GDPR. And Cedric, I know you started to talk about that a little bit. Instead of calling it the GDPR program, it's now the privacy program. So if you can let us know how you're looking at new legislation on a global level and really enabling your privacy program to encapsulate the changes in the landscape going forward.
Well, basically the first thing we do is to compare our data protection framework with the local legislation. Our data protection framework is based on the GDPR. So then we need to adopt localized documents if needed. And with regards to how we follow up on new legislation, well, I guess that you all receive newsletters, and whenever something pops up, we just dig into it. But there's one thing, well, a few things I would like to mention, is that this project brought a lot of very good things. We've been focusing on challenges, but a lot of good things. First of all, following the project, we started working on a more general data strategy. So that's the first thing, together with the office of the information office. Second, we have cleaned a lot of our databases. Third, we have also improved our security for different processing activities. We have reviewed a lot of internal processes when we needed to embed data protection into these processes. And last, we have discovered a lot of shadow IT that was not known by IT. So that was a real good thing. So I thought it was important to mention all these good things that data protection brings to a company.
Yeah, we take that same exact approach with the new regulations, and I'm glad you mentioned all those positives because they really are tangible. Yesterday I heard a panelist talking about risk assessments and how the work that they had done had provided a very, very comprehensive list of government customers, even more comprehensive than the sales organization had. And what you were talking about with discovering shadow IT, that can be a really big benefit of the inventory because you're going to find applications that the IT group may not have visibility into. You can plug them into the business continuity process and disaster recovery, and so you get the added benefit of having visibility for privacy purposes, but then you also know, up-to-date information about who the owners of these systems are, what the systems do, what kind of data they have, which the IT organization may not have visibility into without this. So there are a lot of other positives that can come out of the process.
Yeah, I think not just only in the data privacy context, but generally compliance always brings these efficiencies and synergies, I think, within the organization. And I think we're lucky in the sense that we get to see things holistically. But when we can always bring improvements to the business and cost savings and reduce risk in the organization, I think I would consider that a successful program.
Great. So I think we're at time. So I want to give a round of applause to our panelists. So thank you very much.
Thank you.